The stellar Imperium had, over the course of 14,000 years, developed a peculiar obsession with eyeballs. Not in the creepy collecting them in jars way, but in the exhaustingly competitive my optical organs are better than yours way that only truly advanced civilizations could achieve. When you'd solved little problems like faster than light travel, universal translation, and calorie-free chocolate, apparently the next logical step was arguing about who could see the most colors. The Vrex, for instance, possessed compound eyes that could perceive 17 different spectrums simultaneously, from deep ultraviolet to exotic radiation wavelengths most species couldn't even name. They were unbearably smug about this. The Quilorians had evolved heat vision so precise they could detect temperature variations of 0.001 degrees from 3 kilometers away, which they mentioned at every possible opportunity. The Telkesh boasted distance vision that could read text from low orbit, though nobody had ever established why this was useful beyond winning bets at parties. In this universe of optical one-upmanship, humans occupied a peculiar position. Adequate human vision was fine, functional, middle of the road in that aggressively average way that made other species pat them on the head condescendingly. Humans could see colors, detect motion, judge distances. They managed. How cute. Which made the personnel assignment aboard the cargo hauler, Relentless Profit, particularly amusing to everyone except its captain. The ship was a standard long-haul transport, the kind of vessel that moved manufactured goods between industrial worlds with all the glamour of an interstellar garbage truck. Its crew of 47 represented a dozen species, most of whom tolerated each other with the bare minimum of professionalism required to avoid spacing incidents. Captain Vrexith, a particularly bristly Vrex, whose compound eyes gleamed with the kind of superiority only 17 spectrum vision could provide, ran a tight ship. He valued competence, efficiency, and above all, excellent vision. So when Matthias Kade transferred aboard as the new navigation specialist, Vrexith's mandibles had clicked in what his species considered profound confusion. The human was blind. Not partially sighted, not vision impaired, not squinting really hard blind. Completely, utterly, born without functional optic nerves blind. He navigated the ship's corridors with a white polymer cane, moved with careful precision, and wore dark glasses that reflected the overhead lights in ways that made everyone vaguely uncomfortable. "Explain this to me again," Vrexith had said to his first officer, a Quilorian named Rax, whose heat vision let him see the captain's rising blood pressure in real time. "We're navigating through some of the most complex shipping lanes in the sector, and Central Command has assigned us someone who cannot see." "His credentials are impeccable," Rax had replied, scrolling through Matthias's file. "Top marks from the Navigation Academy. Flawless record on his last 3 postings. Apparently he's got some kind of computerized system that compensates." "Compensates," Vrexith had repeated flatly, "for not having eyes. The file says he's extremely qualified. The file can say he's qualified to navigate by interpretive dance. I want someone who can actually see where we're going." But Central Command's assignments were absolute, and so Matthias Kade had joined the crew to a reception that ranged from skeptical to openly mocking. The common room had erupted in laughter the first time he'd walked in. "They've sent us a blind navigator," wheezed Kilrith, the Telkish pilot whose distance vision was the ship's second most bragged about feature. "What's next? A deaf communications officer? Perhaps a captain with actual leadership skills?" Matthias had replied mildly, finding a seat with the kind of spatial awareness that suggested he'd already memorized the room's layout. "Though I suppose we can't have everything." The laughter had died somewhat. Matthias had that effect on conversations. Over the following weeks, the crew had developed a routine of casual dismissal. They'd make exaggerated efforts to describe visual phenomena. "Oh, you should see this nebula, Kade. The colors are amazing." "Oh, wait." They'd express theatrical concern about whether he could find his quarters. They'd question loudly and to each other how exactly someone who couldn't see a navigation display was supposed to plot courses through three-dimensional space. Matthias had endured this with a patience that seemed almost amused, as though he were waiting for a punchline only he could hear. He did his job flawlessly. Routes were calculated with precision. Course corrections were minimal. Jump coordinates were always accurate. The ship's computer interfaced with systems in his quarters that nobody quite understood, translating visual data into formats that somehow worked for him. It was all very mysterious and slightly unsettling. "How do you even read star charts?" Kilrith had demanded one day in the navigation bay. Very carefully, Matthias had replied, fingers moving across a tactile display that rippled with patterns only he could interpret. "But you can't see the stars. Neither can you when your eyes are closed. Yet somehow you manage to sleep without drifting into a sun." The crew had decided he was weird but functional, like a piece of equipment you didn't quite trust but that technically worked. They'd settled into an equilibrium of mild disdain and grudging acknowledgement. Then Captain Vrexith had announced their new assignment, and everything had become significantly less amusing. "The Void Maze," Vrexith said flatly, the briefing room falling silent. "We've been contracted to deliver industrial components to the mining colony on the far side. The Void Maze is a navigation hazard," Rex observed carefully. "Ships have been lost there." "Ships with inferior navigators," Vrexith replied. "We, however, have excellent visual sensors and a crew with superior optical capabilities. We'll manage." Matthias, sitting quietly in the back, had tilted his head slightly. "The Void Maze is a region of space where sensor systems become unreliable due to exotic particle interference. Visual displays fail. Most navigation equipment becomes non-functional." "Your point, Kade. Just clarifying. Wanted to make sure everyone understood that your excellent visual sensors will be approximately as useful as a chocolate hull breach." Kilrith had snorted. "We'll still have our eyes. My distance vision works perfectly well without computers. In three-dimensional space with no reference points, limited light and particle interference that creates optical illusions." Matthias asked, "That sounds delightful. I'm sure your eyes will work wonderfully. Better than your non-eyes." Kilrith had shot back. "We'll see," Matthias had said, and left it at that. The Relentless Profit approached the Void Maze 3 days later with the confidence of a crew that had never seriously considered the possibility of their own limitations. The region appeared on long-range sensors as a dark patch in space, a volume roughly 40 light-minutes across, where normal space-time got weird in ways that physicists could explain with equations and everyone else described as just bad. "Visual confirmation of the boundary," announced Kilrith from the pilot station, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of someone who'd just proved he could see something first. "Wonderful," Matthias murmured from navigation. "Congratulations on observing the large, obvious thing directly in front of us." They crossed the threshold, and for approximately 4 minutes, everything seemed fine. The crew had started to relax, begun making jokes about overblown hazard warnings, the usual hubris of people who'd never genuinely failed at anything difficult. Then the displays had started flickering. "Sensor glitch," Rax reported, frowning at his console. "Temperature readings are inconsistent. Visual spectrum is fragmenting," another officer called out. "I'm seeing multiple overlapping images." The ship's main view screen, which had been displaying the relatively normal-looking starfield ahead, suddenly showed 17 different versions of the same space, each shifted slightly, creating a nauseating kaleidoscope effect. "What's happening?" Vrexith demanded. "The void maze is happening," Matthias replied calmly. "Exotic particles are interfering with electromagnetic sensors. Your screens are trying to display data that doesn't make coherent sense anymore. Your computers are confused. In approximately 30 seconds, you'll be navigating blind." "We have eyes," Kilrith insisted, but his voice had gained an uncertain edge. "Then use them," Matthias suggested. The ship's lighting had begun to flicker, not because of any power failure, but because the automated systems were receiving contradictory data about what normal lighting should be. In the navigation bay, officers were staring at displays that showed impossible things: stars in positions they shouldn't occupy, distances that changed when measured twice, trajectories that curved in dimensions that didn't exist. "I can't trust any of these readings," Rax said, heat vision useless when the sensors themselves were lying about thermal signatures. "Captain," Matthias said, his voice cutting through the rising panic with irritating calm, "I suggest you let me navigate." "You?" Vrexith's compound eyes were trying to process 17 overlapping versions of his bridge, and the effort was giving him something very much like a migraine. "You can't even see the screens." "Exactly," Matthias agreed. "I wasn't planning to use them." "Then how? How do you see without fear?" Matthias interrupted, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. The bridge had gone quiet, except for the unsettling hum of malfunctioning sensors. "What?" Vrexith managed. "How do you see without fear?" Matthias repeated, standing from his station and moving forward with that same careful precision, cane tapping against the deck. "Because right now all of you are terrified. Your eyes are telling you things that don't make sense. Your superior vision is showing you 17 different realities, temperature signatures that shift, distances that lie. And you're afraid because suddenly the thing you've relied on your entire lives has become untrustworthy. So I'm asking, how do you see when you can't trust sight?" Nobody answered. Kilrith's distance vision was showing him collision courses with asteroids that probably didn't exist. Rax's heat vision was detecting temperature variations that physics said were impossible. Vrexith's compound eyes were processing too much contradictory information, and his neural system was struggling to make any coherent picture. "I'll tell you how I see," Matthias continued, reaching the captain's chair. "I listen to the ship's engines and hear the harmonic frequencies that indicate stress on specific hull sections. I feel vibrations through the deck that tell me our mass distribution and relative velocity. I use echolocation systems that map spatial geometry through sound waves that these particles don't interfere with. I process data streams that you've never bothered to notice because you were too busy looking." He'd moved to the helm station, where Kilrith sat frozen, staring at a view screen that showed 6 different versions of imminent death. "Your vision has made you dependent," Matthias said quietly. "You never learned to navigate without it. You never had to develop other senses, other methods, other ways of understanding where you are in space. And now, when sight fails you, you've got nothing else." "We're going to hit something," Kilrith whispered, eyes locked on the impossible displays. "Close your eyes," Matthias instructed. "What?" "Close your eyes. Stop looking at screens that are lying to you. Stop trusting senses that are being manipulated. Close them and listen." Slowly Kilrith's eyes had closed. "What do you hear?" Matthias asked. "The engines. The life support. The hull stress indicators." "Good. What do you feel?" "Vibration. The deck is humming at. We're pulling slightly to starboard." "Excellent. Now input a correction of 0.3 degrees to port. Don't look at anything, just feel the ship respond. Kilrith's hands had moved across his controls by memory, inputting the correction. The ship's vibration pattern had shifted, smoothed. "We're not going to die?" Kilrith asked, eyes still closed. "Not in the next 30 seconds, Matthias confirmed. "Captain, I need control of navigation. These officers need to stop relying on their eyes and start using every other sense they possess. We can navigate through this region, but not by sight." Verexith had wanted to argue. Every instinct, every aspect of his superior Vrex physiology screamed that vision was paramount. But his 17 spectrum eyes were currently showing him 17 ways to die, and the blind human was the only one who seemed calm. "Do it," Verexith ordered. What followed was 3 hours of the most terrifying navigation anyone aboard had ever experienced. Matthias had taken command of the navigation systems, but more importantly, he'd coached every officer through the process of navigating blind. He'd taught them to listen to acoustic sensors that mapped obstacles through sonar, to feel the ship's orientation through inertial data that had nothing to do with visual reference points, to trust instruments they'd never bothered learning because they'd always had cameras and screens. "There's a debris field 30 kilometers ahead," Matthias announced calmly. "You won't see it on screens, but the acoustic return shows a spread of metallic fragments in a roughly spherical distribution." "I don't see anything," an officer protested, eyes open and useless. "Then stop looking and start listening," Matthias replied. "The sonar display isn't visual. It's a pattern of tones that indicate density and distance. High pitch, close and dense. Low pitch, distant and sparse. Listen." They'd learned, slowly, painfully, with the kind of grudging acceptance that came from realizing your pride might actually kill you. They'd learned. They'd discovered that human navigation systems included dozens of non-visual instruments specifically designed for situations where sight was unreliable. They'd found that spatial awareness didn't require eyes, that velocity could be calculated through harmonic analysis of engine output, that proximity warnings could be tactile or auditory and work just as well as visual alerts. Matthias had guided them through the void maze with a running commentary that mixed instruction with that same mild sarcasm that suggested he was enjoying this far more than was strictly professional. When Kilrith successfully navigated around an obstacle cluster by sound alone, Matthias had actually applauded. When Rax managed to calculate a course correction using only inertial data, Matthias had called him almost competent. They'd emerged from the void maze after 3 hours and 12 minutes, every crew member mentally exhausted from processing information in ways they'd never had to before. The moment they'd cleared the boundary, normal sensors had flickered back to life, showing them the safe, empty space on the far side. The bridge crew had sat in stunned silence, staring at displays that once again made sense, at a reality that had returned to being visually comprehensible. Matthias had returned to his station, cane tapping, and sat down as though nothing particularly interesting had happened. "Navigation to mining colony is straightforward from here," he reported. "Estimated arrival in 43 hours. I'll be in my quarters if anyone needs me. Try not to crash into anything obvious." He'd left the bridge to absolute silence. After a long moment, Kilrith had spoken quietly. "We would have died in there." "Yes," Verexith agreed, his compound eyes finally showing him a single coherent image of space that felt almost boring in its reliability. "We've got the best vision in the fleet," Rax added. "Multiple species, multiple spectrum capabilities, enhanced distance sight, thermal imaging, electromagnetic perception, everything," Verexith repeated, "except the ability to see without eyes." The rest of the journey had been remarkably quiet. Crew members found themselves paying attention to sounds they'd previously ignored, to vibrations they'd never noticed, to data streams they'd always considered secondary. The navigation bay's acoustic sensors, previously decorative equipment that nobody bothered with, suddenly seemed worth understanding. Matthias had continued his duties with the same calm competence, though the mocking had stopped. When he'd walk into the common room now, conversations didn't pause with derisive laughter. Instead, officers would ask him questions about echolocation systems, about tactile navigation displays, about how exactly he'd memorized the ship's layout so thoroughly that he never hesitated in moving through it. Practice, he'd said, and the understanding that my life depends on paying attention to details you've taken for granted. A week after they'd delivered their cargo and departed the mining colony, Kilrith had approached him in the navigation bay with a peculiar expression that mixed respect and confusion. "I've been practicing," the Telkesh admitted, "navigating with my eyes closed, using the instruments you showed us." "Good," Matthias said. "How's it going?" "It's terrifying. I feel like I'm flying blind." "You are flying blind," Matthias pointed out. "That's the entire point. How do you stand it? Not knowing what's out there, not being able to see threats." Matthias had smiled, an expression that Kilrith couldn't see but somehow sensed. "Who says I don't see threats? I just don't use my eyes to see them. Sound travels. Vibrations carry information. Temperature changes indicate objects. Every sense except sight tells me what's happening around me. I see just fine. You're the one who's blind." "I have exceptional distance vision," Kilrith protested automatically. "And in the void maze that made you more helpless than the blind guy with a cane," Matthias replied. "Vision isn't about having eyes. It's about perceiving reality accurately. You can have 17 spectrum capabilities and still be blind to everything that matters." The ship had continued its routes, and gradually something had shifted in the crew's culture. Officers had started cross-training on non-visual instruments. Emergency drills included sensor failure scenarios. The acoustic mapping systems got upgraded. Someone had even posted a sign in the navigation bay that read, "In case of visual sensor failure, consult the blind guy who's been telling you this the whole time." Captain Vrexith never apologized directly, but his mandibles clicked with considerably less superiority these days. When crew assignments came through for the next quarter, Matthias' name appeared with a notation, "Critical personnel recommended for retention." The galaxy continued its obsession with optical superiority, with species comparing wavelength ranges and spectrum counts at diplomatic functions with the same intensity humans once reserved for military parades. The Vrex still bragged about 17 spectrum vision. The Quilorians still mentioned their heat perception at every opportunity. The Telkesh still won bets about reading text from orbit. But aboard the Relentless Profit, there was a slowly spreading understanding that vision might be more complicated than they'd thought. That sight and perception weren't quite the same thing, that the ability to see everything could somehow make you blind to what mattered. And in his quarters, mapping routes through regions of space where normal sensors failed, Matthias Kade worked with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd proven a point, without ever needing to see the looks on their faces. He could hear the change in how people moved around him, the respectful distance in their footsteps, the questions asked with genuine curiosity rather than mockery. He'd been right all along, of course. Not about being better than them, but about something more fundamental. They'd never learned to see without fear because they'd never had to see without eyes. They'd confused the tool with the skill, the organ with the perception, the hardware with the understanding. Outside the viewport that Matthias would never look through, stars blazed in spectrums he'd never perceive, in colors he'd never name, in wavelengths beyond human capability. The universe was vast and brilliant and visual in ways his neurology would never process. And yet somehow, impossibly, he saw it more clearly than most. The galaxy's obsession with eyeballs continued unabated, because some lessons are too philosophically inconvenient for entire civilizations to learn. But on one mid-tier cargo hauler, 16 species of superior visioned beings had learned to navigate with their eyes closed. Sometimes the blind really do lead the blind. The irony was that only one of them had seen it coming.